she and I were talking beforehand about some of the experiences that she has had and some of the uniquely womanly attitudes and features that made her able to be successful in what many people would think of as a man's world. So Annette, could you come up and start to tell us about it?
Good afternoon. I'm honored to be here because I'm here with the future. I'm so proud of everybody here. You should be proud of yourselves, and congratulations for getting selected into this program. It's going to be fantastic. So I'm Annette Bianco, as she mentioned, and I had a wonderful career in aerospace. Over 30 years I spent working in the aerospace field, and it all started. It all started long ago, and wanted to start way back at the beginning with my roots. And now that I'm retired, it starts with my mom because I'm a caregiver for my mother. She's 99 years old, and I have somebody during the day that helps me with her, but mostly at night and the evenings, I stay with her, and I get to benefit from still having my mom with me at 99, so that's pretty neat. But she started out a long time ago as an immigrant to this country. Her and my father came over from Italy prior to World War II, so it wasn't a really friendly environment for Italians back then, as you know. They were on the other side. So my mom had some great stories of being an enemy alien at the time and having to be quarantined, so that after, not quarantined, but they weren't allowed out after dark. So even as of recent, my mom was always afraid of being out after dark, and so that stayed with her, I guess, from those early days. But there they are on Treasure Island. It was the World's Fair back in 1939. It lasted quite a long time when they had the World's Fair in San Francisco. Treasure Island was actually constructed to have that World's Fair there. So, you know, one thing that you can do is definitely ask older people questions, because they were there, they experienced these things. And I remember when I was around your age asking people that had been through the 1906 earthquake. We can't do that anymore, unfortunately, because they've all passed away. So take advantage of who's still living to ask them about experiences. So they came over here. I was born much later, about 20 years after that picture was taken. They had my brother and my sister in between, and then I was born. But one of my early memories and how I wanted to become what I ultimately became started out with the moon landing. And I had a little black and white TV that I still remember like it was yesterday on the kitchen table, that my father said, come and see this, this is incredible. We're gonna see the moon landing and they're gonna walk on the moon. And so what happened was I sat there and watched while Neil Armstrong actually took the first step on the moon. And I heard it when it was actually being said, not recorded, not filmed many years ago, when he said, this is one small step for man and one giant leap for mankind. And so that really stuck in my mind. It was so cool back then to think that that was going on, that I wanted to be an astronaut too. I wanted to go up there. And I was thinking at around 10 years old, geez, by the time I'm older, where will we be? We'll be Mars, Jupiter, and beyond. But so I started looking at, geez, what can I do to become an astronaut? What does it take? And back then, we didn't go to the computer and Google things. We went to the library and we looked up space in the card catalog. And we got books down and we started reading how to do that. And so one of the things that I found that kind of disappointed me was that astronauts couldn't really be women yet, because they picked from the fighter pilots, military fighter pilots, to be astronauts. And so women weren't allowed to be military fighter pilots at the time because they weren't allowed in combat. But, you know, I didn't really want to go into the military anyway because sorry about that. Because being in the 60s, the late 60s, there was a lot of protesting going on that I could see on TV for peace. And the military wasn't really popular from what I could see. We wanted to end the war, not create more. So that wasn't something that really interested me. But I did get some hope. I kept looking at the books, and one said, you know, someday women might be able to be astronauts because they're going to need payload specialists, whatever that was at the time, I didn't know. But in order to be a payload specialist, one thing you could do is go become an aerospace engineer. So before I even knew what it was, that's what I was going to be. And so I studied what it took to be good in aerospace engineering, and of course it came down to math and science and English and generally just being a very good student in all these things to be able to do that. So that's what I set about to do. Little did I know that there was already a female astronaut that existed, and her name was Valentina, and I know I'm not going to say her name right, but Valentina Tereshkova. Does anybody know how to say that better than I do?
Tereshkova.
Tereshkova. Thank you very much. And she was actually the first woman astronaut in 1963. And I was only 4 years old at that time, but I had never heard of her. I didn't even know, for me, there was some talk of Russia having a space program, but the only talk was how we were going to go beat them. At the time, I thought it might have been better if they would have not ignored half their population and allowed women to help compete against them. But at the time, that wasn't the case. And what really interested me was I was Googling for this presentation to do some research, and so I looked up the first woman astronaut, and you can see it says first woman astronaut in the Google field there, yet Sally Ride comes up. So Sally Ride, she's an amazing woman. I got to meet her volunteering at another space camp at Stanford, and she's incredible. But she wasn't allowed to be an astronaut for us until 1983. That was, 20 years later that we had to wait to have a woman in space. And I think that was to our detriment, to not encourage women earlier to go into space. And you'll see that, Valentina wasn't totally forgotten. She's down here on the bottom under people also search for. So that led me to think about my education and how I was going to go to school. And so what I did was I decided that I was going to get married and have kids and go to school, so I wanted it all. I started out being a little limited in that case by going to College of San Mateo, and they had an electronics program at night that I completed. And so I learned to be an electronic technician and then started working at Lockheed Martin. Had a very good job there. But it was really good because they allowed me to continue my education. I had people that supported me continuing my education. So I found out that I could go back to my original aspirations. They had aerospace engineering as a major, and it was new. They just were introducing it because they had aeronautics, but they didn't have aerospace engineering. So aerospace engineering was a new major at San Jose State, and I enrolled in it. I was one of the first people in there. And at the time, there was only me and one other woman in the program. That changed a little bit. I recently looked up statistics, and it's still only 6% female. So I'm hoping that I can help continue to encourage people to pursue those types of careers. And it's so much fun. We got to do what was called smoke tunnel testing. So we would take objects and put them in smoke tunnels and put streams of smoke over different things to look at the effects of turbulence on those things. And so next time you're in an airplane and they say that there's turbulence, see that blue kind of disturbed airflow? That's what they're talking about. There's something, air pockets that have hit the plane that aren't coming nice and smooth. And with that, I wanted to real quick, if I could get a volunteer, show you something that you could do at home and impress your family and friends. And say, I learned a little bit about aerospace engineering and flow today. All you need is a hair dryer and a ping pong ball. Can I get somebody to help me? Anybody want to come up? Okay, I just want you to gently try to put this on top of the airflow. And then we'll go. What happens if I move it? You think it's going to stay? No, I'm going to move it. There it goes. Oh, isn't that neat? Learn all kinds of things in aerospace engineering. And one of the things that we learn is the forces on an airplane. There's 4 forces on an airplane. I was just curious, have any of you studied that in any of the classes yet? 4 forces on an airplane? No? Okay. Lift, drag, thrust, and something that's here right now. Gravity. All right. So when you do that with the ping pong ball, say that I put all those forces in equilibrium and the ball is stationary, but now I'm moving it a little bit, so just be careful moving it or it'll drop off. So I wanted to give you something fun to do, but I also wanted to tell you that there's all kinds of fun things that you learn, and the smoke tunnel is definitely something that was really interesting to play with. So I was at Lockheed Martin, and I continued on until I had the opportunity to go to a program, because as an electronic technician, there were really no openings in the programs. In fact, when I graduated, they had graduates that had held up signs, "We'll build spacecraft for food," in the aerospace engineering graduates, because there really weren't any opportunities then. So I was lucky. I waited a little bit. I went into leadership. I decided to get a degree in engineering management because my skills were needed. Mentioned a little earlier, I think what they found was that women have a unique ability to really try to coordinate and integrate things together. And sometimes people don't work together very well. I found that I had a really good way of motivating people to work without telling them, "Do it because I said so, damn it," and being really tough. I tried to inspire them and show them what their work meant and how, when they did it well, how rewarding that would be. So they gave me a leadership position, and I moved into work on a program called MILSTAR. MILSTAR is a military communications satellite system, and it's in geosynchronous orbit, and geostationary, which means it sits over the part of the Earth as it rotates. So you could look up and it's just stationary, almost like a star, and it rotates with the Earth. And it's about 22,236 miles up, so it's kind of hard to see. You won't see it with the naked eye, that's it. But they allow the military to communicate. There's a constellation of satellites, and they communicate with each other. So it's a really interesting program. I got to learn a lot about how communications through the satellite works, how we hook up to the satellites with terminals on the ground, and how we configure the satellite with ground control stations. And all of that had to work together before we launched the satellite. We had to test it on the ground to make sure it worked. And that was my job, supervising a lot of those tests. And it involved coordinating people from all over the country that worked with different companies that had no relationship to Lockheed Martin. They were other contractors that worked for the government, so I couldn't just tell them what to do, damn it, because I said so. It didn't work really well. But I was able to coordinate them and actually solve a problem that nobody really wanted to pay attention to, that somebody had called to my attention that there was going to be a problem with the system not working after the satellites were going to be launching. And it just seemed like everybody else wanted to say it was somebody else's problem, and I just wanted to solve it. So I worked a lot of graveyard shifts. I went and got the satellite when they weren't using it for other testing. I got other people to help support me. And we actually gathered data to try to help fix the problem before they even realized there was a problem. And so for this, even though I wasn't really recognized by my immediate management for doing anything, I knew that it was the right thing to do. And sometimes you just have to realize that things are the right thing to do. And you have to stand up and show that you believe that it's the right thing to do and keep championing that cause. And eventually I got a letter from a general in the Air Force that said, you know, the success of the test for this system wouldn't have been as successful as it was if I hadn't been leading the test, which really meant a lot to me. And I remember that as one of the really good achievements that made me feel good about what I was doing and all the grief that I went through for it. After that, I went to work on the beginning part of the follow-on system, Advanced EHF, and it was just more capability. If you think of, you're using the internet and you're communicating, Milstar kind of was like old dial-up modems, and Advanced EHF is going to be more like plugging into the internet. And so I got to work on the front end of that program and help define and the design of it, and I was the chief systems engineer for the testing and the test bed that we were going to use to test the system on the ground. And I went on to work on some other programs over time, but I returned to an opportunity that came up, and it wasn't really necessarily a good opportunity career-wise. My management, my mentor were telling me, you know, this isn't a good thing. You have a lot of responsibility. You have over 150 people working for you. You are responsible for a huge budget of money, and now you're going to go to a very small team on a program that doesn't even in total have as much budget as you're responsible for. This really isn't a good career move for you. But that little girl that was 10 years old that was watching that space program, that spark came back when I thought of the opportunity of working on this program, and I just had to do it. Had to kind of take a break from my career and go work on the International Space Station program. And what it was a really small maintenance contract for spare parts for Lockheed Martin to produce so that they could extend the life of the station. And so it was really small, but it gave me the opportunity to actually work with the people from NASA and Boeing, the main contractor for it, and do some pretty exciting stuff. And I had the opportunity also to meet and talk with astronauts, and the astronauts that are in the picture behind you. What happened with this particular part of my stay there was that they were deploying one of the solar arrays. It had been stored on the station for quite some time, and the engineers at Lockheed were kind of concerned because it was stored for quite some time and that things might go wrong, but there was a priority that they had other things to do with regards to the shuttle tiles and making sure that they were safe. And so they said, well, we're just going to deploy it as quickly as possible and get it up there. And so, unfortunately, something did go wrong. And I got a short video here.
We were basically installing a new module called Harmony, but also we were relocating a major solar array truss. And the real challenge was this truss element had been aboard the space station for, I believe, 8 years, and we weren't sure, quite honestly, if all this would work well.
So the way the docking profile worked, we came up underneath the International Space Station and then did a backflip so that the crew inside the space station could take pictures of the belly of the shuttle to make sure that there were no issues. This is something that we started after Columbia. A little unnerving to be 600 feet away from the space station as a pilot and then lose sight of it because you basically do a backflip. But I was really looking forward to shaking hands with Peggy Whitson through the space station hatch because it was the first time 2 women commanders had flown in space together.
We're very happy to see each other. We see folks that we haven't seen for a long time. They've been up in space for months. But it doesn't last long because almost right away we've got to get into our follow-on tasks.
The Japanese lab Kibo and the European lab Columbus were both on the ground in Florida ready to be launched, but we needed to get that hub that would hold them all together in space. And the first half of the mission just went like clockwork.
The second part was to move the P6 array. The P6 solar array is serving as a supplier of power to the International Space Station. So rather than have electrical power lines that we have on Earth, we have our solar arrays that collect solar power at a pretty high voltage. It's very dangerous.
As we built the space station out, we built this long truss that the solar arrays were intended to sit on. So we were moving the one that was sitting on the top of the space station out to the end of the truss and then unfurling it and allowing it to generate power. Of course, you never want to touch the solar array. It's always powered 120 volts DC.
Then we moved the truss onto the final location. Then it was time to redeploy the arrays.
We thought we were across the finish line, and that wasn't the case.
I saw something that looked like a dark smudge on the solar array.
In that moment, when we couldn't see what was going on, the array got bound up and actually tore in a couple locations because the guide wires had slipped out of their proper location and gotten tied up with each other. The solar array itself has little holes designed in it for guide wires. There were rips in the solar array that we needed to repair, and the engineers on the ground came up with a very, very clever, almost a MacGyver kind of solution where we took existing wires and pieces of plastic that we had on the space station and built these cufflinks of various lengths. And then the plan was to go out and weave these cufflinks into the solar arrays so that when we fully extend them, those cufflinks will take the load of the stretching instead of the rips.
So I had to pull onto the solar panel, but I also had to keep it at a healthy distance.
Okay, I am ready to maneuver when you guys are. Yes, I do.
And then also, I had to, with the other hand, install the cufflink through the hole in the solar panel.
All right, big game. That's how you do it, right there. We got it. Good job. Excellent, beautiful. That was a beautiful day in space, right there.
So they managed to save the mission, and it actually was life-threatening for them to not have enough power because they had put another module in there, and they were eventually going to need that extra power. So the astronaut that was speaking there about putting the cufflink in, he was actually a medical doctor, and it was sort of a bit of stitching for him. And what was also interesting about it was that the whole thing was not rehearsed. If you have ever kind of read anything about NASA, they rehearse every single thing on the ground. They make sure they have all these procedures rehearsed out so that when they get there, all the safety concerns are addressed. So he was doing this with a procedure that they had come up with on the ground, that they were reading them, okay, do this, this, and this. But there was a danger to him because he could get electrocuted. There was a lot of high voltage out there, and he had never done this before. So it was quite exciting watching that, and it was quite exciting just preparing and getting up to the point of doing that, because working the solution involved coordinating a lot of people, getting people to communicate, getting people to make sure that they put all the data together and pull this off, and it was successful, so that was good. They came to Lockheed to thank the team. They gave us, they autographed a poster for us, and each one of us on the team got a copy of the autographed poster, so it's one of my treasured, other treasured things from my career at Lockheed. A lot of fun. And then the last thing that I ended up doing,
Lift it up so people can see it.
sorry. So the last thing I ended up doing in my career was I went back. I did manage that big, huge program. I had about maybe 400 to 500 people across the United States working for me. And we provided the operational support for the Milstar system that was all up in orbit, the advanced DHF satellites as they were being launched, which they still haven't all been launched, there's 6 of them, and DISCUS, which is Defense Communications Satellite System that they had up there before I even started on the program. And let's see, in closing, I just wanted to give you the benefit of an older person. And I've seen on TV sometimes they do, what would I tell my younger self if I had the opportunity to step back and I was one of you in this seat, ready to go to this camp? What would I tell you now that I've been through all this? And I think I would tell myself, learn about yourself, right? What do you like? What are you good at? And then be open to learning and trying new things. Learn them well as well. I remember sometimes you have to study until you're, reviewing the material until you're just tired of reviewing the material, that you know it that well that you can just spit it out. That's a key to doing really well on tests. And don't think a failure makes you a failure. Keep going. I mean, you can make mistakes, you can fail, but learn from them. Just keep going. And then don't let others define you. I mean, sometimes I was raised by my mom to really think about what other people think, and I did it too much. I started letting their opinion define who I was instead of believing myself and knowing I could do really good things and anchoring myself into that image of myself that I'm good and I can do this. And make sure that you plan well, but opportunities and surprises are going to come your way. Just take advantage of them. And be the type of person, this is something I've told my kids and my grandkids now, I've got 5 grandchildren. Be the type of person that wants to get things done so they can relax. Just put it in your mind, I have to get this stuff done so I can relax. I just have to get it done. Don't be the type of person that relaxes when they realize they can put stuff off until later. That's the key to happiness, health, and success. I mean, you just see different people do that, and there's some people that they do it to the point where they annoy you. It's gotta get done, gotta get it done, gotta get it done. And I realized that, they're pretty successful doing that. They get things done. But the other people are like, oh, I can do it tomorrow, I'll do it later, that's not a good way to succeed in life. And so that's one of my key statements I say all the time. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this presentation was to encourage you to go out and solve the world's problems, right? Because the world has a lot of problems, and it needs to make full use of all of its intelligent, creative, resourceful women, which is represented here in this room. And everybody else, I want you to do your best to encourage them to succeed and have a wonderful time at your Tech Trek camp, and enjoy the rest of your life in front of you. I'm very excited for you and a little bit jealous because that's all behind me now.